Well, the Justice Department released a memo from the Mueller investigation that recommended that former President Trump not be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. Again, this is around the Mueller investigation. It has nothing to do with the raid on the president's home earlier this month.
So they're now releasing this?
Well, the Justice Department had been fighting releasing this. A watchdog group had filed a Freedom of Information Act 3 years ago to get their hands on it, and a judge sided with them. So now we can all see it. So originally when I saw this, I thought, oh, are they releasing this to prove to us that they don't play politics, right? That maybe we could see into the Mueller investigation why they made certain decisions, and then it would encourage us that what they're doing now around the president is not political. That's not the case. So we are all going to sort of put aside whether we like President Trump or not, and think about whether or not this was right, whether or not this is political, or whether or not it leads us to a constitutional crisis, right? I know that's hard to do. And whenever I sort of make room for the Justice Department, like, maybe this is fair, let's just see, I see your comments saying she's so naive. And it makes me laugh because I want to just sort of like give it some space while also acknowledging this is dangerous, right? So, okay. I've said those disclaimers. So this report in question comes from the Attorney General's office. It was their summation of the Mueller report and recommendation to then Attorney General Barr that the president not be further investigated or charged based on their read of the Mueller report. The details are all legalese, but it does give a window into how these work, right? Is this political or not? Was the Mueller investigation political or not? And after reading it, it's not a simple answer at all. The Mueller teams, there were 3 teams inside the Mueller investigation, they all disagreed on the legality of President Trump's behavior at the time, but their recommendations not to charge the president revolved around his position and his opportunity to defend himself. So in the book, Where Law Ends, one of the lead investigators, Andrew Weissman, he wrote that we had prepared a summary of our findings highlighting key conclusions and evidence in both volumes of the report. When Barr announced he would be issuing something publicly shortly after receiving our report, I assumed it would be these summaries. Now, again, Weissman was one of the lead investigators, so he wrote about the whole investigation in his book. And the main conclusion, right, that Bob Mueller came to was that the president could not get a fair trial. I'm going to rely heavily on this book for this discussion because...
Wait, underscore that again. So the summation from Mueller was that he felt that President Trump would not get a fair trial.
So because inside his team, they all were really tossing around this maybe have been an illegal thing. This maybe have been an illegal thing. But the president could not get his day in court. He could not get a fair jury. He could not get a fair judge, given that he appointed judges, right? And they felt like they had to be super careful because whatever they charged him with, it would have to be provable without a shadow of doubt. And he would have to be tried by a jury of his peers, which you cannot get for a president, and because his very existence is political, right? So this was the main reason that Bob Mueller really did not want to make charges, even though the investigators inside his team thought that certain behaviors might be indicative, that a jury might find those things criminal, but they just felt like they could not. So again, this brings the question, if a current president could not have his fair day in court, could a former president have his fair day in court?
Yeah, what changes? Like, what's different then?
I'm leaning towards that he couldn't, right? Even though, like, I want to maintain that every American should be subject to the rule of law, it does not. His existence is basically a constitutional crisis.
Have you ever done jury duty?
No.
I did. And I was on a high-profile murder case in Florida when I lived in Florida. And at the time, I worked in television. And the jury selection process took all day. And they really wanted, first of all, they wanted to know that you could be fair. And they really wanted to make sure that you didn't know anything about this story. this story, this case at all. Like that this guy allegedly, hurt this woman, killed this woman. And all like, do you read the newspaper? Do you understand? So how in the world are you going to find a fair jury for President Trump that doesn't?
Which is something that we need to ask ourselves now, depending on what's happening around the raid on his home, right?
Right.
So the report that we're looking at, written by the Deputy Attorney General for Attorney General Barr, was written on March 24th, 2019. Okay, this is the report, which strikes me as odd because, as Weissman says in his book, the Mueller report was only submitted to the Justice Department 2 days before that. And the Mueller report was 448 pages, submitted on a Friday, and it included 22 months of investigative work. So how could the Justice Department write a summary of 448 pages in 2 days to release to the public? March 24th is on a Sunday. That's the day of this memo.
Yeah, it included 22 months of work.
Yeah.
There's no way. Like, I used to wait until the last minute to do like a 15-page essay in college.
Right.
And there's no way I could get it done.
Even with the full weight of the Justice Department, right? How could they have read it in that amount of time and summarized it and further came up with these conclusions, right? So that is troubling. It should be troubling to all of us because we all paid for the Mueller investigation with our taxes. So we should want for it to have landed in a legitimate way, right?
Right.
That same day, then the 9-page memo is submitted to Barr. Then Barr turns around and releases a 4-page summary to the media, his own report. This turnaround time is extremely troubling, right? And the screen that I just showed you that the Mueller team had prepared sort of a summary that they thought that they could present. That's not what was released to the memo, and that's not what was in this to the press, and that's not what was in this memo. Instead, we just have this 9-page summary of it, right? So in this document, in this 9-page summary that we just got to see today, the Justice Department is recommending no charges, and so the watchdog group is interested in whether or not this memo is consistent with the 448-page actual Mueller report, or did the Justice Department sort of massage it, draw their own conclusions because they were loyal to Trump, right? But the memo, this memo that we're looking at, it doesn't necessarily read like politics. It does mirror the sentiment that Mueller had, for instance, that the president could not get a fair trial on these issues. This is what the memo says. The special counsel concluded it would be unfair to reach any charging decisions because the president would not then be afforded any opportunity to clear his name before an impartial adjudicator, which still seems true, right? Which may still be true. This is the troubling part, right? Either it's a constitutional crisis because there's somebody who is above the law, or maybe it's a constitutional strengthener because it means that we care so much about a fair trial that we can't charge someone without it, right? So you be the judge of that. One thing that constantly frustrated the Mueller investigators was that Trump seemed to be sort of, I don't want to use the word bribing, like motivating witnesses with the potential of pardons at every turn. So when they would get an eye on someone, every time Weissman talks about they got an eye on investigating someone, Trump would either say on Twitter or in the press that he had the opportunity to pardon so-and-so person, and this seemed to be a way that he was using the executive office to prevent people from testifying. And then when the investigation seemed to be heating up, he would threaten to shut it down on Twitter very often. So they were always kind of rushing, like, we might be shut down tomorrow. So,
Well, that was his strategy to like stop a witch hunt, right? I mean, these people are coming after me. So what do I do? What do I have the power of the bully pulpit, which is the podium. I have the White House. What can I do to like stop this? If I think it's a witch hunt, I'm going to use it. Right.
But so they saw it as possible obstruction.
Right.
The memo says, well, he was acting publicly. And so that's not necessarily obstruction, right? Weissman says that the facts that around the investigation of obstruction of justice, he says this: the facts were no less appalling, although we had not indicted the president or frustratingly even taken the final leap of putting a label on what the facts added up to. Instead, our report set out numerous episodes that provided clear evidence against the president. This is what he thinks. So why then? Why did they not make any charges of anything? Well, he says, we were forbidden from indicting him for these crimes as we were employees of the Department of Justice and bound to follow an internal department policy that no president could be indicted while in office, whether we agreed with that or not. So again, the Mueller team, they went rounds and rounds, but it was ultimately Bob Mueller's call that he won't get his fair day in court. And so they were never allowed to indict, and they chose never to push this. They thought maybe they could get Supreme Court ruling on it or something, but they did not make any suggestions. They sort of laid out what they thought was evidence of what Weissman thinks is crimes. Now, I'm going to say, I do think Weissman, he's motivated in one way. He really felt like the president should have been answerable to the rule of law. Barr obviously was loyal to Trump. So these are two different sides, right? My problem is that this call for this memo was made in just 2 days. And I don't know, I really think there's room for interpretation on what everyone did here. And I do think Bob Mueller was right to be extremely careful about the president not getting his fair trial. Right. But for the rest of us, it's extremely disturbing because that still is true.
Right. So, and any future prosecution would have to go through that lens of whether or not he would get a fair trial.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really.
So now, if I can just because I'm trying to wrap my head around this, because I just like one of the things I focus on in life when I'm looking through news and stuff like that is sort of how unbalanced judiciary is entirely. So if you take that analogy that they can't get a fair trial, that should then exonerate Johnny Depp. He could go out and shoot 20 people, but because he just recently had a famous trial, there's going to be people that have a bias towards him one way or the other already. And therefore, because people would know who he was and know that there was a bias, that he could not be tried for anything. I mean, that basically, if you are known and divisive, you are free to commit whatever crime you want. That's what I'm hearing out of that. I mean, am I missing something in it, or am I getting that?
I mean, if then that's the new precedent that, clearly social media.
But there was law that said a president could not be indicted, or policy at the time, right? So at the very least,
right.
But you're right about that then this will make special laws for everybody, right? Because everybody could be considered, or everybody famous, right? I think there's more to it than just the fact that Trump is too divisive, but that is certainly part of it. And he is no longer a president, so he is. A civilian, right? So should he be? I don't know. I find this extremely tricky, and I don't think that. I think when I saw it, I thought, oh, this will give us a clue into how political the Justice Department works, and I'm still very divided on it.
So is our audience.
Yeah. What is the general sentiment?
Some people just say they can't follow it. It's complicated. It's crazy, and it was a witch hunt. And others are saying Mueller did a bad job. I'm just seeing other people. Let us know in the chat. What do you guys think about this? Do you think that the president of the United States... They could get jurors
from the border.
Do you guys think the president of the United States could get a fair shake in a trial? Yeah. Let us know.
I don't know. The Weissman book reads very interesting because he feels convicted the whole time that the president is doing wrong. And he has a lot that he is able to share. And I think it's interesting that the Justice Department even allowed him to publish this book. It ran through, all the channels. He lays out all of this evidence that, is hard to refute. And then in the end, and he feels like Mueller made the wrong call. I think that that's what he's trying to say. It is an interesting read. I don't know if you'd like to read it or not, if I suggest it, but I did read it. So.
I don't think I would. No.
Okay, don't read it.
Don't. No.
I just summarized it for you.
Yeah, thank you on that.